Many times when I do these lectures, I have it like in my mind for years, like the Eightfold Path. I knew I wanted to do that. Soon I want to do the hero's journey, take a deep dive into it, and then explain hero's journey to you. But this morning I woke up with, I wasn't totally sure what I was going to do. I had some vague ideas, and then one of our group members had an interaction with a little baby turtle, and I knew instantly what I wanted to do in the group. And so everything happens for a reason. So when you saw that little turtle, it gave me the idea for 2 turtle stories that I want to weave together. Today's unity recipe, we may call it, is going to include some Buddhist philosophy, some animal science, some Islam philosophy, linked to the Christianity of last week. Unity recipe, okay? Linking it all together. Remember, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love God, which includes turtles, which is what that is. Again, I worked about an hour on that turtle. Someone today said it looked like it was flattened by a car. I'm like, come on, I worked hours on that. But like all these drawings, I'm going to try to link them together. The key is, can you see the connection between these things, right? So we'll start with this cup, which also happens to have a turtle on it, although that's not the point of this cup. It's just useful for some Buddhist philosophy. And here's the way to understand the nature of mind, or at least one way to understand it. Here we have, remember last week we talked about the ego voice inside our heads and the spirit voice inside our heads, and how to tell the difference. The ego is the noisy gong and the clanging cymbal. The ego judges things. The ego compares things. The ego separates things. The ego also is very good for earth things. It's earth guide only. Like, where's my car keys? What time is my appointment? That's useful. That's what the ego is for. But the ego is terrible for meaning in spiritual things. And we have to listen to this other voice. A couple weeks ago, we talked about how Einstein said science can only go so far. Science can point us in directions, but we have to find meaning from another source. Okay? So, understanding what the ego is quite useful, especially when it comes to the nature of mind and what this cup is about. So I'm holding a cup, and there's an inside of the cup, and there's an outside of the cup. And you could say there's a space inside the cup, and there's space outside the cup. But are they different? Yes and no. I mean, inside, outside, that's different. But the actual space that makes up the outside is the same as in the inside. And yet they're different. Why? Because of this container. Now, this Buddhist teaching describes, all right, now you understand the nature of mind, because the ego is a cup. The ego is a thing that separates us from the nature of reality. All of this space, if you will, which is light and love, is what we're all part of. It's home. But then we show up on earth, physically speaking, and we get a cup. You might call it your soul. That would work. Noah's Ark comes into mind because it's a container of sorts. And what happens is there's a separation we experience inside and outside. And yet, what if remember there's space right here inside. What if I move the cup? This space that we just called the inside, now what is it? It's this space. It's all of it. It's interconnected. It's the same space that was outside of it. But when the ego is removed, there's now unity. Now we see the commonalities in all things, right? Spatially. The Buddhist teaching says, and that's what Buddha nature is. In Christianity, you'd call it Christ consciousness. If this is all Christ, because Christ is all inclusive, he's the one that said the Lord is one, all of this is one, well, each of us have a little, separation part of our minds, if you will. But the unity is to actually get rid of that, to learn, not get rid of it permanently, but to diminish its importance. And then all of a sudden we can see the Christ in each other. Namaste, right? So that's the intro into some turtle stories, and linking it to what we talked about last week with this wonderful Rumi teaching. So we start with this. Where's my stick? So we start with this idea of, again, a Buddhist philosophy of how difficult awakening ultimately is. And the teaching I read went something like this. Imagine you're standing near the ocean and you're able to throw a ring buoy out on the surface of the ocean, right? Somewhere out in the ocean. Throw it 25 miles out there on the surface of the huge ocean. And there's a sea turtle on the bottom of the ocean that starts to swim towards the surface. What are the odds that a sea turtle somewhere out there in the ocean would swim towards the surface and just happen to poke its head through the ring buoy? What are the odds? It's infinitesimal. I mean, it's extremely unlikely. They say that the odds of anyone becoming enlightenment is like that sea turtle sticking its head through the ring buoy. It's really difficult for many different reasons. Because how many people are focused on it, right? How many people understand what we're supposed to be doing while we're here? Why does Jesus say, forgive them, they don't know what they do? Not many people know that we're here to work on unity. In fact, most people, thanks to that separation ego thing, think we're supposed to compete with each other, and we're here to establish dominion over each other. That's what most people think. And most of us experience that in our personal lives as well. You know, the whole winning thing. That's what the ego craves. And it compares and all that stuff. And it's a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. What we're supposed to be doing is something similar to this, what the sea turtle could be doing by finding its head poking through that ring buoy. What we're supposed to be doing, something else that Rumi says, is uncovering and realizing our divine true nature, which is this again, realizing that the space that's inside me in my mind, the ego aspect of myself, actually comes from the oneness of everything. And that's you and you and you and me and everyone. We all have our little ego separator, but we all have to remove that. And then we have the unity consciousness going on, okay? So not many people know that, and so the odds aren't very good. But then I flip that story into this turtle story, and this is turtle science. I learned about this a couple years ago because I work with addiction a lot, especially with my favorite science word, endorphins, which is what the solution to the opioid epidemic is all about. Got plenty of videos online about that. And how endorphins fit into the experience of a sea turtle. Now, I was looking up the source of this. I couldn't find it. What I'm about to tell you is true. I just didn't find the endorphin source, but it still works. Sea turtles get buried in the sand, and then as I understand it, the mom takes off and just goes and does her thing. A couple weeks, months, whatever it is, the sea turtles later, they get born, and then they just head out into the ocean. And then they swim around out in the ocean for like 5-10 years, doing what sea turtles do. And then some around 10 years, they develop, they're mature, and now they can give birth themselves. And so they mate. And then when it's time to give birth, the sea turtles swim back to their home base. And they find somewhere close to where they were born, and they lay their eggs there. And the question, isn't that beautiful? And the question is, how the heck do they figure out, how do they remember? We're talking about thousands of miles of coast, and they could be buried anywhere, and yet they always find their way back to the vicinity of where they were born. How are they able to do that? So, and there's other examples of sea turtles finding, amazing sense of direction. How are they able to do that? Well, the answer is they have some sort of an internal compass. And when I encountered it myself, studying the nature of mind and neurochemistry and all that, I came across that sea turtles produce endorphins too, just like human beings do. And that when the turtle is on the right path, the brain releases chemicals, in this case endorphins, to give it a sense of peace. So what does it do? It stays on that path. Now what happens when it varies off the path? It loses the endorphins, and now it gets a little stressed. And so it thinks, I should swim over here. And whenever it gets on the right path, it produces the brain chemistry again. The words that I just affirmed to make sure I was getting this right was they look for chemical cues. It's imprinting. There's something about the nature, that the water, the sand, landmark. We can't understand it. We're not turtles. But we can relate to it, because when we're off the path, we don't feel so good. And then when we're on the path, we feel better. And that's what we talked about last week with the spirit, God, mind inside ourselves. Because the ego is the clanging gong and the noisy cymbal. Got that backwards, but you get the point. The ego is the thing that is trying to compare, and it does a bad job of it. Okay? The ego is earth guide only. The ego is edging God out. But the spirit voice is going to affirm you. And it's going to say, you're on the right path. Keep swimming that direction. And it's quiet and it's subtle, but it's affirming. And so these turtles find their way back home. Well, guess what we're doing? Whether it's this turtle or this turtle, once you know, and this is supremely important for this Rumi teaching, once you know what you're supposed to be doing, this is why stuff gets much more difficult once you have some form of a spiritual awakening. And we've done a lot of videos on this. But once you know that you're supposed to be sticking your head through that ring buoy, stuff changes. Now, the good news is you have a mission. You have an objective. You know what you need to do. And if that sea turtle stays focused, like, wait a minute, where's that ring buoy? And it knows what to look for, the odds for it getting its head through that the ring buoy go way up? Of course. We finished the Eightfold Path earlier this year. What's step 7? Focus. If you know what you're supposed to be doing, you stay focused on that ring buoy and you swim up and you stick your head through it. And that's what awakening is, okay? You also use your sensors, if you will, to find your way, to find your path, to tell whether or not you're on the right path. The energetic experience of this is you will produce a chemistry that gives you an emotional state that affirms you. And can't fool Mother Nature. And the system is set up beautifully. And when you're off the path, you won't like it, the feeling you have. When you're on the path, you'll be affirmed to keep walking. So all of this, these 2 turtle examples are backing up, that listening to this still small voice inside our head. First, you have to know that it's there. How many people don't know the still small voice is there? Or mock the whole idea because the whole world is so obviously physical. Of course, Einstein and friends tell us it's not physical at all. It's energy. And how many people are willing to consider that? Not many. But once you know that, and once you get called into a spiritual journey, all of a sudden, all right, it's clear. I need to work on, say, Buddha's last words. Strive for your own liberation with diligence. Your job isn't to find another sea turtle and force their head through the ring buoy. Your job is to do it yourself. Your job is to find your way back home. If you want to call that heaven, or if you want to call that this space, you have to get rid of this, and then you're back home. The unity of things, it is the oneness of things. It's the love of everything. Okay? So that's the job, and that's what the still small voice will be telling you. Which brings us to Rumi's wonderful teaching here. Now, it's very short, but as I experience it and understand it, it's Rumi, or a narrator, talking to God. And he says, what about my eyes? And God said, keep them on the road. And I said, what about my passion? And God said, keep it burning. And then I said, what about my heart? And God said, tell me what you hold inside of it. And I said, pain and sorrow. And God said, stay with it. The wound is where the light enters. Now, a lot of people have heard that part before, the wound is where the light enters, but I really love the rest of this, okay? Because we're going to flip it into these turtles here. What about my eyes? Keep them on the road. See, this is not, again, like all spiritual teachings, it might work physically. And this is great advice if you're driving, isn't that true? Is he talking about your physical eyes? Watch the road. That makes some sense. But what road is he talking about? This is the pathway that we're talking about, both of these. Our eyes, third eye, if you will, your spiritual eyes, keep them on the road. The journey towards full enlightenment, the journey back to heaven, towards nirvana, whatever word you want to use. You have to keep them on the road. You know the path now. People who are watching this video out there are interested in this stuff. Most people aren't. If I actually did some fun turtle videos, we'd get more views. Okay? You bring your turtle in and I'd probably get more views, right? But not that many people are interested, so, whatever. But if you're interested, your job, keep your eye on the road. What about my passion? He says, keep it burning. Well, how hard is it to keep your passion for this burning? Especially if you're the only one in your little area, okay? Or your family or friends, and there's just not that many people around. You got to keep the fire lit yourself. If you're in a sangha or a group of people, it's a lot easier to keep it burning, and we should do that because your fire can help light mine and vice versa, okay? Well, he says keep it burning, but there's 2 levels here again, too. Of course you should keep your passion for spiritual development burning. What if this turtle stopped swimming? Either one of these turtles, these little baby sea turtles, and they get out here, they don't swim back home, then the story's not nearly as good. So your passion, keep swimming, right? Like Dory in Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. But also your physical passion. I say this again and again. This isn't about telling people to stop being human. Whatever your human passions are, just do it with spirit, right? Don't let people who are otherwise not playing these games, playing on the spiritual journey with you, don't let them bring you down. Keep your passion. Stay human. And so go after your human goals, but do it with the spiritual awareness. What about my heart? Now this is fun because you're expecting it maybe to go in a different direction, okay? Oh, it's filled with love or something like that. But what about my heart? God says, tell me what you hold inside of it. Well, that's great, because it's first asking you, well, what is it that you're working on, right? What are you passionate about? And if it's what's inside your heart, oh man, the love of money, that's what it's all about. Well, I'm sure God would say something else after that. But what's inside your heart, that matters, because what are you swimming towards? Are you trying to get back home? What's in your heart? And the answer is pain and sorrow. You're thinking it might be something like, everlasting love or something like that, agape. But it's pain and sorrow. Now, why? We just spent months on this kind of stuff. The spiritual process includes a lot of this. What's actually happening? The ego itself is feeling the pain and the sorrow, and it's feeling, through empathy, the pain and sorrow of everyone else's experience. I was just read this morning about the Buddha's experience of enlightenment, in which he had this major desire to share his awareness with everyone else. But with it came this major sorrow of realizing that most other people don't care and they're not going to get it anyways. And so he was lifted and sunk at the same time. I'm like, yeah, that's about right. And so if you have that experience, there's going to be a lot of pain and sorrow. And the answer isn't, well, just stop that or just love instead. What a brilliant answer. Stay with it. We've been talking about this in this group too. What are you supposed to do with this kind of pain? Cover it up with drugs and alcohol, make it go away with some physical. No, stay with it. Why? If I'm a turtle and I'm swimming in the wrong direction and I get way out here and I get lost and I'm off my path, what happens to the endorphins? I stop producing them. How do I feel? Pain. Is that going to still teach me something? Does the pain and sorrow still teach you something? Absolutely. This whole experience we're having, every moment, God doesn't waste a single moment. It's all perfect. It's all love. Somehow pain and sorrow turns out to be love. So stick with it. Don't duck your lessons. Lean into the pain. Of course, the moment you do that, there's a certain surrender, and then the pain and sorrow can shift. I mean, we don't want to stay there. We do want to get back home. Stay with it. It's going to teach you something. If I veer off my path and I feel some sort of pain, what experience am I going to have? The universe nudging me in a different direction. So feel your pain. Don't bypass it. So then you get back on the path. And then this awesome teaching, the wound is where the light enters. So if this separation device called the ego can be called darkness, and there's a million scriptural references to darkness and light, and almost all of the darkness can be described by this Buddhist teaching too. If what's in here is darkness and what's outside here is light, of course, the Miracles talks about this too. The reason why we suffer is because we feel disconnected. Why do we feel disconnected? Because we believe in the ego. If we could eliminate this, all of a sudden we would feel connected again. But now the wound is where the light enters. If this cup is darkness and this is light outside of here, and I could penetrate this cup, if I could poke a hole in it, what would happen? Would darkness pour out or would light go in? This is the way it's set up. If you get your ego wounded somehow, and you know what the journey is, what happens automatically? It is default. Light shines in. It's literally what Rumi is saying. The wound is where the light enters. Anytime you penetrate that ego, and it's a nice sound. Anytime you penetrate that ego, light pours into the cup. Now, what if I poke holes all the way on every single aspect of this cup? What would happen? I poked so many holes it would disappear. Now, what am I? I am the light. No, who said that? Right? When Jesus says you're the light, he's being literal, right? Metaphysical and literal, to the extent that what we are the beings that are supposed to be sticking our head through the ring buoy. And that's when we realize, it's the light, I get it. This whole journey back home, to get back home, you better follow the light, and there's no doubt about it. And our experience with each other comes with a whole lot of people, including us, like most of my life, not interested in this stuff. That's darkness. And all we're supposed to do is connect to the light. That's it. And when you do it, enlightenment literally means bringing light to you, right? You're in the woods and it's dark and you find a flashlight. Awesome. That flashlight's going to help you. So here we have Rumi giving you superb advice, just like the Buddha saying the same thing, all tied into the Christian teachings plus some nice animal science, all saying the same thing. It's a difficult journey. It's a subtle journey. But once you know that it's your journey, you got to keep your eyes on the road. You embrace the wounds as they happen to you. Don't run from them. Allow the pain and the sorrow to teach you. It's okay. You'll eventually learn from it no matter what. We're all doing this whether we know it or not. But your job is to make sure you're getting your head through that ring buoy, right? So you find your way back home.